Hi, I'm Tim Whitehead, and I'd like to explain why I use radio. Let's try that again. I'm Tim Whitehead, and I'm here to explain why I use radio as a missionary. Over the last couple weeks, I've been building the argument about first why I'm a Christian, then why I'm a missionary, and then why I do radio missions. Last time we talked about infrastructure challenges and how radio crosses all of those barriers. But today I'd like to talk about literacy, and actually more specifically, orality. You see, if you look over to the UN studies and so on, they say 70-80% of the world is literate. Well, that's not so accurate because those numbers are skewed by the West. Canada, the US, Europe, 99% literacy rates. So when you take away those countries and you get into sub-Saharan Africa and rural parts of South America and Asia, you have literacy rates that are tragically low. Literacy meaning people cannot read more than maybe a kindergarten level. Maybe they can read a street sign, maybe a price on a sign where they got to buy something, but they can't read. They can't engage specifically a Bible. Literacy rates are particularly low in countries like Chad, Guinea, and South Sudan. They're actually the three lowest literate countries in the world. And Gelcom does a lot of work there because we use radio, the spoken word, where people can hear the gospel, they don't have to read it. Most studies say about 30% of the world is non-literate. Some say it's even as low as 20. But again, those numbers are skewed. The more important topic is orality. Not only are there areas where people can't read, there's a lot of places where people simply don't read. Reading is not a part of their culture. They can go to school, but everything in their tradition is passed down storytelling from generation to generation, passing down the culture and the myths and the morals of that community, never written down. And Wycliffe, a great Bible ministry, great missionary agency for close to 100 years, they've been translating the Bible into all of these other languages and then making up an alphabet, writing it down, and then doing literacy programs. But even then, those people choose not to read in those communities. Maybe if a handful will choose to read the Bibles they've printed, they just don't engage because they're oral learners. It's estimated that 70% of the world doesn't read, whether they can't, literacy, or don't, orality. That's why I do what I do with radio. Radio crosses the literacy barrier. We don't have to worry. Wait, I've got another stat for you. In those areas where illiteracy is rampant, 2/3 of people that are illiterate are women. North Africa, Middle East, those girls don't get to go to school past about grade 4 or 5 because they're expected to help in the home. They don't even get the chance to read. That's why radio is so important. It crosses the literacy and orality barrier. The other great thing about radio is storytelling. Typically, most of those oral cultures are based on storytelling. Now, there are some that don't, particularly the Quechua in Bolivia. It's a news culture. They bring news, not stories. I got a great story to tell about that in a minute. But most of these cultures are based on myths and stories from the past that are brought down that explain the morals and values of a culture. Radio is a great avenue for storytelling. Maybe you've heard of the old Dick Tracy radio dramas and The Shadow, and you can listen to these old radio shows on YouTube and just listen to them and not watch anything, just close your eyes. But you get the people walking down the path and all those things, and it brings this theater of the mind and all this sorts of imagination. Radio is a great tool for storytelling and bringing the values and morals. There's a ministry we work with called One Tribe. They're based out of Africa. They're trying to reconcile these fighting tribal groups who may both identify as Christian, but they fight amongst each other, and they're trying to show them that they are one tribe in Christ. And they use radio drama, common everyday things, and a couple of women washing their clothes down by the riverside, and they present a whole story around it and address really serious issues for reconciliation. But what about those Quechua? Well, I forgot to mention too, I'm all over the place today. When we first started making our radios, it was just a solar-powered radio. But then a few years ago, we added an audio Bible. So there's the book, chapter, and verse functions there. And now our new Compass player, we can add so much more. With the new navigation, we can put on Bibles and sermons and stories. We're talking about audio Bibles. Our friends at Mosig Chasqui in Bolivia, reaching out to the Quechua, were recording the audio Bible and using a couple different voices. And then they got to the Song of Solomon. Well, if you're familiar with the Bible at all, it's a bit of an odd book. It's a love poem between a king in Israel and his lover. And they go through the whole thing, and he talks about how her neck is like a tower and her hair is like goat's hair. It's really confusing, doesn't translate so well into English. But for the Quechua, they couldn't just have one man reading through that. It wouldn't make sense. People come from miles around to meet the people presenting on the radio station there, because truthfulness and news is important. See, Mosig Chasqui means new messenger. The Chasqui was a messenger that would go out from the Inca king to all the groups, and he would bring the news, the truth to people. So the radio station is called Mosig Chasqui, New Messenger, from the king bringing his message. And they travel around, so it's very important that whoever is bringing the news is bringing the truth. So you couldn't have a man just doing both sides of the Song of Solomon poem. And in fact, you couldn't just have any man and any woman do it either. They needed to be married for this to work. So they had to bring in a couple just to do the Song of Solomon, and then when they got to the next book of the Bible, back to the normal thing. But it's that cultural sensitivity, and with audio scriptures and with radio, we can do that. So why do I use radio in missions? Orality. 70% of the world doesn't read. Radio solves that problem. So we talked about obeying Jesus as a missionary. We've talked about sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. But how you do it is just as important as why, and that's why we use radio. Come back again. I'm going to share again why we use radio to beat another barrier to missions.